All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the stream. I hope everybody is doing well tonight. We are live now on Twitch and YouTube simultaneously. All right, so tonight we're going to pick up where we left off last night, make it a little bit further with our sort of refactor that we're doing involving handles. And we're going to see if we can, how much of our scene we can actually tie up tonight. Hopefully, we can get pretty far. Before we get into that, however, I do want to take a quick second, just thank the supporters of the channel who are listed here on the screen, beginning with our partners, who are the highest tier of subscription over on YouTube memberships and Patreon. They are Gabby Bashir and Gerboles Inc. I'd also like to thank all the other supporters listed here. They are a combination of the other tiers of support over on Patreon, YouTube memberships, as well as Twitch subscriptions. So thank you all very much for your support. It means a lot, and I greatly appreciate it. And of course, I appreciate each and every one of you who join me on the Twitch side, the YouTube side, or if you're just following along in the series in the archives, I appreciate you guys being here. So without you guys, this project would not exist. So thank you for being here. All right, with all that said, tonight we are going to basically pick up kind of where we left off. I did do a few things off camera. But nothing really too substantial. So I think it was only pretty much in the scene and the skybox. So we can go through a diff real quick of that. And so one thing I did was I just added in the scene just a quick, sort of helper function just to get and release scene attachments from that array that we built last night. And then in the scene node initialize, we kind of changed some things around a little bit, just kind of tying up some of the loose ends that we had. So we've got most of that in place. We also have a lot of the initialization logic for the actual skybox attachment actually done. So essentially what we do at this point is we go ahead and create the skybox config and use it to actually create the skybox. So that's hasn't changed from last night. However, instead of pushing it to the skybox's array, what we do is we go ahead and destroy the skybox config first, and then we go ahead and initialize it. And if that initialization is successful, then we go ahead and find an empty slot in the skybox's array. If there's not one, we go ahead and push one at that point. And then whatever index we wind up using, that is the index that we then pass on to the attachment we created, right? So we set the resource handle, which is created by that index. The attachment type is skybox, and then the hierarchy node handle is the node handle that was passed into us that we created earlier, right? So there's that. And then in terms of the process children, let's see what all changed here. I believe this is mostly, I did a rename of node to node config, so that's most of what this logic is. That's on the incoming parameter of this function. Let's see, that was up here. Right here. Yeah. So that's what this change was, right? I just renamed this from node to node config because it's actually not a node, it's a config for a node. So we have that. And then in terms of, let's see, actually, I think that's mostly it. The only other things that we touch on, we did add the loading code for skyboxes. So we loop through all the skyboxes that exist and load those. And then here's the scene attachment acquire and release. Those kind of work the same way that we've seen in other systems. The main difference here is the acquire basically just acquires the handle, right? And sets the attachment count and all that stuff. And then the scene attachment release actually performs the skybox destruction. Whenever we release the attachment, we're saying, okay, let's go ahead and destroy the attachment because we're releasing it, right? So we do that. We're going to need to do that for each individual type of attachment. And that is pretty much it for that, I believe. Everything else has to do with the skybox. So the skybox itself, we no longer store the configuration in the skybox. So we did have this config being stored here. That's no longer happens. We just copy over the properties and store those instead. So a lot of these are just, these changes are just eliminating the config out of that. We also added a skybox state. So that is just the state of the individual skybox itself. So there's an uninitialized, initialized, and then it's loading and then loaded. And those are the states of that, right? So when we start skybox load, we set it to loading. When that is complete, we set it to loaded. And then when we unload, we set the state to skybox state undefined. So that will help us in the scene when we're trying to figure out what state the object is in at any point in time, as well as what is a free slot versus otherwise. The rest of this is just that config change, right? And then here's that enumeration, right? So we have undefined, created, initialized, loading, and loaded. So undefined essentially means that there's nothing in that skybox slot in that array. Created means that skybox create's been called. Initialized means that skybox initialize has been called. Loading means that load has been called, but load is not complete. That can be asynchronous. And then loaded means that the load is complete and it's ready to be rendered. And that's it, right? So nothing too crazy was done offline. Riken27, thank you for the follow. Appreciate that. How are you doing tonight? Davol, thank you for the follow. Smudge, good evening. Good to see you. Glad to have you here. Davol, first time chat, welcome. Good evening. Hope you're doing well tonight. So we're just kind of getting started here. I was just finishing up going over what we kind of, what I did off stream since the last stream, right? So we're going to kind of pick up where that left off. I feel like we're done pretty much with skyboxes, at least for now, as far as the scene is concerned. So we're going to move on to some of the other types and get those in as well. I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. I appreciate that. Yeah, can't complain. Looking to get some neat stuff done tonight. I don't know that we're going to get through all of the scene refactor tonight. I'm hoping so, but we'll see where we wind up. Okay. So, we have in our scene H. Let's see. We did skyboxes, and we have skybox attachment indices. So we do go ahead and push into that, so that we should all have. What we need is we need one of these for our other types. So I think I'm going to tackle meshes next. And then terrains after that, because terrains will pretty much be the same implementation as meshes, mostly. So let's see. So we have mesh attachment indices. And you know what? I'm going to define these other arrays while we're here. Might as well get them at least plugged in, right? So terrain attachment indices. We have point lights. You know what? Let me do this actually. So we'll say directional light attachment indices and point light attachment indices. Okay, so we have a set of attachment indices for each one of these things. So that should be good. We might eventually wrap this in some sort of struct, but I'm not so sure that's needed for right now. Okay, this other thing like the debug grid, I'm not going to worry about that just yet. That probably is going to be that's going to be a root node on its own, I think. And we might actually, I got thinking about this. we might actually take all the debug stuff out of the standard scene, and we might have like a special debug scene just for rendering debug stuff, right? And then we render that separately from the other scenes. Let's see. Doing well, just upgraded my PC a bit. New ultra-wide monitor and a 4090 to power it. Nice. That's freaking awesome. How do you like the ultra-wide? Maybe it's too soon to tell, but I've always wondered how those are. First time chat, Faulty Pine. Welcome. Really appreciate your consistency and hard work on all this. It's such valuable stuff. Well, I appreciate your appreciation. Thank you for that. That kind of feedback makes it worth it to me, right? So thank you for that. Smudge, how's the job hunt going? So, I have something, but I'm not quite ready to talk about it, only because, I mean, I guess call it a little bit crazy, but it's not real until I actually start something, right? So I have something in the works, I'll put it that way. I should be good to go on that, actually. So thank you for asking. But yeah, we will, I'll make a formal announcement once I'm actually in and started, right? Until that happens, it's not really real to me, and I don't necessarily want to divulge too much there. PS1. Hello, first time chat. Welcome to the stream. Glad to see you. Ruche, thank you for the yar bongos. Interesting keeping us on the edge of our seats. That's not really the intent, unfortunately. It's just call it paranoia or whatever you might. I just don't like talking about it until it's real, right? So, what plugin do you use to highlight certain tagged comments like left off? That is NVim comments, but I actually have forked it into my own version. So let me get the... let me grab you the actual repo, my version of it. Because mine has some special things, additions to it that allow you to do things like type to do and then like my name, for example, or your name, right? And it still highlights it. The original version didn't do that. So let me see, where is it? It's been a while since I've touched it. Trying to remember what the heck it's called, actually. I think it was just... Roland, thank you for the follow over on the YouTube side. Appreciate that. Welcome. Where the heck is it? There it is. All right, so it is this guy, to-do comments.mvim, right? So this is for NeoVim. I'll go ahead and drop it in the... I'll drop a link in the chat for those of you that want it, right? But yeah, that's the plugin, right? So like I said, it's based off of this guy's folks version of it, but you know, I kind of added my own tweaks to it, right? So no problem. All right, cool. So let me see. Villager, hello. Good to see you. It's been a bit. How are you doing? So far, I'm really liking the ultra wide. It certainly helps that it's 240 hertz and OLED. Nice. Yeah, I'll bet it is beautiful. I'm still on 60 hertz for everything. Technically, two of my monitors are 75 hertz, but I just sync them all at 60 because Linux essentially throws up if you have multiple refresh rates. It's essentially two 16:9 monitors side by side. Nice. I'll bet that is pretty sweet. Fancy zones is a necessity for ultra wides, though. Creates better zones to snap windows so you can actually make better use of the screen real estate. Yeah, that would be a big issue because I like working with stuff maximized. So yeah, that would be a deal killer if I couldn't do that for sure. Doing good. Got a cube rendering in Vulkan. Sweet. Jai is really nice. Yeah. I do want to give Jai I want to give Jai a try one of these days, but I just don't have the capacity to take on something like that. I also want to give Zig a try one of these days too, but time is money, right? So yeah. Philippe over on the YouTube side, hello, welcome. Okay. Let's see. Let me get rid of that. All right. So the next thing that we were going to do was convert the meshes to use this, right? So we're going to actually skip down a little bit here. And we're just going to grab this mesh logic. And I'm actually going to cut it. And we'll go back up to scene node initialize. And in the attachment type, we're going to put this in the static mesh section. And I'm just going to scope this to make sure that we don't have any sort of weird switch statement fighting situations going on. All right, so similar to what we did with the skybox, I think I'm also going to add a mesh state. So I'm actually going to go to mesh, which should be in resource types. It is. So we removed the transform last night. We do have the mesh config, which is going to be changing some. So we actually do need to address that. We do have this parent name thing that we don't need anymore. In fact, I'm going to remove that now because I know we don't need it. So we have the name of the mesh and the name of the resource that we want to load, the number of geometries, and the geometry configs that we load in from the resource. Oh, my cat has decided it's a great idea to play with a light socket. Squirt bottles are awesome. All right. I don't know what's gotten into him. He's being a bit of a bananas tonight. Okay. So I think all we need to do for this is, instead of holding on to a copy of the config, we already have the name, right? We'll take a copy of that. We'll take the resource name. We'll take a copy of that and hold on to it. And then we already have the geometry count and the geometries, right? We can take that straight from the config. So we actually don't need to hold on to this config anymore, right? You don't care much for Zig. Can I ask why? Because I haven't really dug very deep into it yet, but I'm curious to hear other perspectives on it for sure. Because I know Spiro, if you don't know him actually, you definitely should follow him. He is a big proponent of it. He loves it, and has been trying to get me on it for a while now. See if I can. There we go. So he's not on right now, but definitely shout out to him. He does all kinds of really cool things on his stream, by the way. He's always running challenge streams and raising money for charity and doing really cool, wacky stuff with WebAssembly and Zig. So definitely check him out if you haven't already. Stretch Redeem, thank you. Roland Quest, thank you for the follow. Appreciate that. What's going on, Mr. Roland? I know who you are. Magetz, good to see you. How's it going? Welcome to the stream. Appreciate you being here. All right. So now that we've eliminated that, we do need to add. We'll do type def enum, and we're going to call this mesh state. underscore. All right. And we're going to say mesh state. And then we're going to say undefined, kind of the same as what we did in the skybox, right? So we're going to say undefined mesh states created, mesh states initialized, mesh states loading, right? Because that could be asynchronous as well. Mesh state loaded. Right. So basically, if it's been unloaded or destroyed, it's going to be defined or undefined rather. If we've called create on it, then it's going to be created. If we've called initialize on it, then it's initialized. If we've called load but it's not complete yet, it's going to be loading, and then when the load is complete, it's going to be loaded. So with that, I think we can go ahead and put here mesh. Oops. Caps lock mesh state. Right, and actually let's bump this down. And so that way we can actually also read what's going on in this list of meshes, right? We can tell which slots are free because anything that's undefined is not loaded, created, initialized, any of that stuff. So we can actually use that as a free slot. Two-step, hello, first time chat, welcome. Glad to catch you live. Awesome. Well, welcome to the stream. Glad to have you here. Hope everything is going well. All right. So we have that. So we're basically going to more or less follow our pattern for the skybox. So over here, and in fact, let's see, scene node attachment skybox. Did we create this for the other types? I think we did. I see directional light. Yeah, okay, we do. So we're more or less going to do kind of the same thing here. So let's grab this and put this up here. Right, this will give us our typed attachment. And then, let's see, we've got meshes. So let's see, scene config meshes. So this is actually trying to load multiple meshes in the scene, which may not be what we want to do. In fact, it isn't what we want to do, right? Because we are switching to a hierarchy. Instead of using just a flat list of meshes in the scene, we are actually using our tree for this, our hierarchy tree / graph, whatever you want to call it. So this bit can actually go away, which means also this goes away, and all of that should shift over. Okay, so we have that. So we're basically going to be handling these one at a time. Let's see. So it looks like we then check the configuration of the mesh to say, hey, do we have a valid name and a resource name? Because we require both. So let's see. Down here, we create the skybox config and then use that to create the skybox. So I feel like we need to kind of do the same thing here. Scene config meshes. Don't we have? So we have typed attachment cube map name. So we should be able to extract the properties that we need from that. So if we go, this is instead of scene config, this is going to be, actually, this is just going to be typed attachment name, I believe. Oh, it's the wrong type. Instead of attachment skybox, we need attachment mesh. Static mesh, rather. So that's going to be, we have resource name. Right, because the name would have been moved to the node. So that makes sense. So we actually don't need any of that. And we just say resource name is required. New mesh config. The name is going to be, we actually don't need the name, so let's actually remove that from the mesh config. Let's peek definition on this guy and go up here to the mesh config. We're going to delete the name because that's part of the node configuration, so we actually don't need that. All we need is these three guys. So we don't actually need that at all. New mesh config resource name. We do need that. Instead of scene config meshes, it's going to just be typed attachment resource name, right? So we take a copy of that. And then we don't have this parent business here anymore. That's no longer a concern of the mesh. We have new mesh, then we call mesh create. Failed to create new mesh in scene. So we don't have a name here. Resource name, let's see, k-free resource name. Why did we do... Yeah, okay, that's correct. All right, so this should be freed so we don't leak the memory. We don't have the parent to worry about. And at this point, we would return... Do we return a Boolean here? I don't remember. We don't. All right. So what do we do here? I guess we just return, right? Because we're not actually gonna do anything with this. Okay, so the transform is actually handled by the transform node, or the hierarchy node that reaches into the transform system. So we don't do that either. And this darray push might not even happen either. So we have that. We create the mesh. We destroy the config. So in fact, we need that again. So we have new mesh config, resource name. Oh, we haven't taken the configs or the geometry count yet. And I don't know that we have those in this guy. So we have the resource name here. So at this point, we'd actually need to load up the resource. So the mesh initialization shouldn't be responsible for that. The load is what actually will handle that. And all it should need is the resource name. So why does the mesh config then require that? Let me open that up. Let's take a look at the implementation, because it's been a while since I've done this. Let's see, we need mesh create. So we were keeping a copy of the config before. During initialize. Okay. That's right. Because we can create meshes in code. Right. Okay. But our loader doesn't need to worry about that. So we don't need to populate those. So essentially the way that this worked, now I remember this. So we have potentially resource name. And if the resource name does not exist, then we take a look to see if there are any manually supplied geometry configurations. And that's for things like if we want to create a very specific shape in code that isn't actually loaded from a resource, where we actually, create those geometry configurations and add them to the mesh versus just loading a resource, which would load a mesh from disk. So that actually makes sense. What also makes sense is it's add time. So for those of you who are new to the stream or over in the YouTube side, on Twitch, every 30 minutes we are served with 90 seconds of ads, or I should say up to 90 seconds of ads. Some people get them, some people don't. Some people only get like 30 seconds of ads. But regardless, I pause the stream so that nobody misses anything, and it gives us a chance to hydrate, get up and go to the bathroom if you need to or whatnot. And I put a timer on the screen so that you guys know exactly how long we have. And over on the YouTube side, I see that there's a question there. I will answer that in just a second, once we get back from ads. Let's see. It's got about 30 seconds left on ads, and then we'll continue. Almost done. And ads are dead. Cool. All right. So, for those of you who couldn't hear what I was saying, if you're new to the stream, we pause the stream for ads. On Twitch, we are served ads once every 30 minutes for 90 seconds. And I believe that that kind of sucks for like a programming stream to have ads come up. You can't hear what I'm saying. You can't see what's going on, right? That sucks. So I pause the stream so that nobody misses anything, right? And I also put a timer up, which is a fairly recent addition, so that you guys have an idea of how long it's going to be before we come back. And so if you need to get up and get some hydration, which all of you should be doing, you have time to go do that, right? Okay. So Ben over on the YouTube side says, hey, first time catching you live. If you don't mind answering, if you have the time, how did you get LSP to work on Windows Vim? Most LSP requires Clang's compilation description to work properly, or are you using Clang? So yes, I am using Clang. The secret is I auto-generate for each of our libraries this compile flags, which gives me include paths, defines, things like that. And that's essentially how it works, right? I can use that. I don't have to use the other, what is it? Compiler options.json or whatever that file is. I don't have to use that. This is enough. And so this compile flags.txt is generated when we actually do a build. So our make file actually generates those for each one of our projects, right? So if we do take a look at, like, this is our engine. If we take a look at like our plugin for audio, there's one there. You know, our testbed application has one. Our testbed lib has one. Like, they all have one, right? And the build process just sets that up for us, and that's how our IntelliSense works, right? So that's more or less how that works. Hope that answers your question. All right, so editing a 25K line file because I generated some bindings, never realized how slow LSP gets on such a large scale. I don't have any files that large, but that would be, I think just about anything would be a little bit slow at that scale. Although it doesn't seem to have a problem with, I think the longest file I have is probably my Vulkan backend file, which is about 4,000 lines, and it doesn't seem to have an issue there, but that's quite a bit smaller than 25K. Yay, I love this ad thing you got going on. Yeah, I think it's a really good thing to do, right? A lot of people seem to appreciate it because then they don't miss stuff that's going on. Smudge, I love the Spiro dance. emotes there. It's always a good one. Spiro's awesome. All right. Best handling of ads I've seen, well done. So I can't completely take credit for all of it, right? I actually got the idea from Pirate Software, which you guys may have heard of him. And he is another game dev on Twitch. I'll give him a shout out real quick. And so he is also one that pauses during ads. However, the counter idea is mine. So I can take credit for that. But yeah, I got the idea from him, and it seems to be pretty well appreciated. I know I appreciate it when he pauses a stream. So yeah, Spiro does have some good emotes. I actually need some help making emotes. I don't know what emotes to make, and I probably would be really bad at actually making them. So if any of you guys have any ideas for that, feel free to leave something in the Discord server. Okay. The entire open NURBS lib in one generated file. Oof. That's rough. Counter is a great idea, so users know when you're taking a break. Exactly, and when exactly I'll be back, right? How many emote slots do I have? I actually don't know the answer to that. And I don't know if I can look at that without clicking away from like my admin view. Let me see. Let me go to I forget where that is in here. Is it under? Here it is. So it looks like free emotes, I have 5 open slots. Tier 1 emotes, I have 9 regular slots open and 12 animated slots open. Plus I have 2 bonus animated slots open for that. Okay, I don't know what that means, but apparently 2 more. And then 1 each for tier 2 and tier 3. So, yeah, quite a few. I just have no idea what to actually create. Yeah, Spiro has really good emotes. I like his emotes a lot. I'm just afraid of getting, DMCA'd by Nintendo if I use some of the ones he's using. So I don't, Let's see. Yeah, that's another way to do it. Okay. Thanks for the clarification. Yeah, no problem, Ben. Do you use any kind of session manager like Tmux? Been looking for something that works with Windows. So, unfortunately not. I've not found anything like Tmux for Windows. It's super annoying that it doesn't exist. It drives me nuts. The multiplexer that I'm using is part of the WesTerm terminal that I'm using, right? So this down here is what I'm using for that. It's part of WesTerm. Maybe it's got some stuff. I haven't really dug in too deep, but yeah, I really like Tmux. I prefer Tmux. It's one of the pain points in working on Windows, but I don't feel like writing one of those for Windows. It is super sad. I feel like if I did write one of those for Windows, it'd probably be super popular because there isn't one. But I also feel like there's probably a reason there isn't one. So, yeah. It's kind of annoying for sure. You just use Commander. Commander is it's basically just a tab terminal though, isn't it? Right? Like, kind of like WesTerm is. It's just tabs, but it's not like necessarily a multiplexer, if that makes sense. It's not like quite the same thing as Tmux. Like, these are separate like controls versus kind of all in the same actual terminal window. This is the best way I can think of to describe it. Anyway. All right. So over here, we get our resource name. We have a continue here. That should probably be a return. And then I use tiling window managers, so you don't really have much need for multiple terminals. Also, one of the reasons I switched to Doom Emacs for CPP. Yeah, I mean, I might eventually give Emacs a try. I haven't given it a fair shot, to be fair. But I've become so proficient in Vim that I feel like that would be super painful for me. But yeah, I don't know. Tiling window managers, I have a love-hate relationship with them because I don't want everything to be tiled. And the best one that I've seen so far was, what the heck was it called? Hyperland. But it's the problem is it's Wayland based, so I had lots of software that couldn't run on it, and it doesn't get along with NVIDIA all that well. Although that's getting better. But I'm kind of like at the point where I'm beginning to not care about that, and I just want to just do as much as I can in the terminal and never leave the terminal. So tiling window manager is basically just a big session manager. Exactly, yeah, more or less. Doom Emacs has Vim key bindings, yeah. But I don't think it's going to have, like, I guess some of the things I've gotten used to are like some of the plugins I use, like my fuzzy file finder and stuff like that. So it might be, like, it's got the basic Vim key bindings, but it's not going to have all my custom stuff too, right? Which is not its fault. It's not marks against it. Just doesn't have it. Okay. So create mesh config, then create the mesh. So we do that. We destroy the config. What was the next step? So initialize is going to be, I think, the next step. So we'll do if not mesh initialize, and we're going to pass the address of new mesh. Right, and in this case, we'll just do k-error. Oops. Failed to initialize static mesh. And I'm thinking we should return. And then if we do initialize it, that is where we basically have to do all of this kind of stuff. So I'm actually just going to copy this logic for now. And we might actually wind up standardizing this into sort of a function. If we can find enough common pieces between them. So we're going to say static mesh slot. So we're going to find a free static mesh slot and push a new one. So we'll do a rename on this one. Let's just call this count, right? So we're going to do that for the D array that is meshes. And the state is now going to be, meshes sub I states. Mesh states. What did I want? Undefined. Yeah. So if it's undefined, we're going to consider the slot unused. And then meshes is going to be new mesh. Otherwise, we are going to push into the array new mesh and just use the last index as our, or use the count, which will now be count plus 1 as our index, right? So it'll be automatically kind of where it needs to be. Acquire a scene node attachment and set its resource handle. So scene attachment is here. We acquire one of those. let's just call this mesh attachment. Fail to acquire scene attachment. If that fails, okay. Resource handle, we create one of those using the index. The attachment type is going to be static mesh. The hierarchy node handle is going to be the one that we pass in, and we should be good to go. So we're basically going to follow this sort of pattern for all of the sort of resource types that we have, right? So we've got that done. Our initialize, I think we already removed the code out of here. Yeah, terrains. Okay, I'm not going to worry about this debug stuff for now. I'll move that at the last minute. Hierarchy. Okay, so the hierarchy stuff I'm going to completely kill because this is no longer valid. So that's gone. We also, let's see, we have mesh count. Where is that defined? Really? Definition is empty? Do we not have it defined? Oh, we probably don't. We probably don't because we removed that block of code. So what we need, what we really should do is say if scene meshes, check that first. Right? And then within that, we'll say U32 mesh count equals the array length scene meshes, right? And then we'll have that. Oh, wait a minute, though. This is calling initialize on all these things, which has already actually been done. We don't actually need any of these blocks, right? We're doing that all kind of in one shot now. This is actually doing the same thing for terrains. We're going to nuke that too. And then we update the scene state. Okay, cool. So as we cut these out, as we cut these individual resource types out, this will get smaller and smaller, right? All right, so scene load. We load our skyboxes here. Load static meshes is next. So I guess we should probably say if scene meshes. Right, we should probably just be safe and check that. Then we load each one. Pretty self-explanatory stuff. I don't think we actually need to change anything there, actually. You know what? I'm actually going to make this change as well for terrains while we're here. So if scene terrains, we'll just load all the terrains. Load terrains. Right, and then by keeping them in contiguous memory like this, it should make that operation much faster, I think, right? Let's see. So if we actually commented this out at one point. Terrain failed to load. I guess we could not fail the scene load if we actually, just because we actually happen to like. You know what? Yeah, I kind of agree with that. So if we actually fail to load a mesh, let's just bleat about it, but then move on. Right? Let's not actually kill the loading operation over that. Okay. Scene unload. Actual unload is what we need. So in this case, we have the skybox unload destroy. I don't know that we actually need to change this stuff. We might not actually need to change this. So let's leave that where it is for now. And I think actually we might actually be done. Okay. So let's actually go back to initialize. We're going to go back to scene initialize. And we're going to pick up the next type. Let's see. Been living in my terminal for years. Imagine the old grandpa voice. Like in a really bad horror movie. Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, I like terminal life more and more these days. Man, you should try Zig. Yeah, I do plan on trying Zig. The main thing keeping me away from trying Zig right now is it's so new, right? And they're still working stuff out with it. I want to wait until it's matured a little bit before I try it. Because the last thing I want, especially with a project of this size, is major like breaking language changes, which are going to be common with something like that when it's in its infancy. I can't take that kind of instability at the moment. Let's see. You want to switch windows without alt tabbing. Yes, I get that exactly. Like, I prefer to just be able to, like in Tmux, it's just Control B N, right? Or Control B 0 or 1 or 2 or whatever the tab is. It's nice without having all that visual overhead of like trying to figure out which window you actually want, right? By alt tabbing. Okay, so I think we said we were going to do terrains next. So terrains, I believe those were more or less the same as meshes. Let's see. Terrain scene config. Okay, so we're actually going to have to open up terrain H, because I think this is where our config is. Yep. So this is probably another thing that we need to think about as well. So our config, we are keeping a copy of that, I think, or are we not? Actually, maybe we already did away with that here. We already did away with it. Cool. It looks like the terrain holds everything that it needs from the config after it's created, and we can nuke it. Well, that's good. That saves us a step. All right, so the terrain config. We have a name. We don't need the name anymore, because the name is technically not going to be on the attachment. It's going to be as part of the node, right? So you name the node, not the attachment. Oh, does that make sense though? That might not actually make sense. Let's put that back for right now. I may actually want to undo that. Okay. It does have a transform, and it shouldn't. So we do need to get rid of that, because the terrain should pull its transform from elsewhere, right? Theoretically, this is not going to be quite the same as maybe a mesh would be, where we're going to have multiple instances of the same terrain, I don't think. But we don't necessarily want to bar our users from doing that, right? So we should probably just support that and decouple the transform from the terrain. So we'll get rid of that. And then over here, I think it's pretty much just going to be a matter of, let's go ahead and take this whole section and snip it out of here. And let's see, scene node initialize, that's where we need to go. And we need to handle the terrain. So we'll do this for now. Put this here, we'll add some scoping. One more here. All right. And then we'll do, I suspect this is also a loop of terrains, which we're not going to do anymore, right? We just want to handle one terrain at a time. So we are not going to do that. So we can automatically just get rid of that logic. Okay. So I think for meshes, what we basically did, let's get the typed attachment and the typed attachment resource name. We're going to need both of those things. So we need that first. The typed attachment is going to be terrain. We're going to say invalid terrain config. Resource name is required. Okay, so that's that. Which means we can get rid of that. Let's see. This looks like old test debug code. I'm going to get rid of this. We don't need that. Okay, so this one's a bit funky, actually, because it doesn't work exactly the same as some of the other assets, right? Because we actually, we load up the terrain resource here, get the parsed configuration from that, which includes the xform, which it should not include. And then we do create on that, right? So, and then we unload the resource. So the question is, do we want to do this here? Or should this really be part of the load? I'm thinking this should probably be part of the load. Why do we create? So let's take a look at, our create and see what we're getting. Because we're getting our config. So basically when we create our terrain, we're expecting to already know like its dimensions, its height map, all of that stuff. Tile count, all this stuff. I feel like a lot of this stuff probably doesn't belong in create. It probably belongs in initialize, right? Because that's where we should be really like setting up all of our arrays and things like that. What does initialize actually do in this case? So initialize actually just generates our chunk geometry, which is kind of lightweight, right? So I don't think this is right. We should refactor this, right? Because our scene should not be loading resources. That's just wrong. I'm guessing I did that to try and just get it working and then forgot to refactor it, right? So we should probably go ahead and fix that. Let's see. Neat, found your channel today and you are streaming. Awesome. Well, welcome. Welcome to the channel and the stream. Too bad you're on your 15-minute break. We'll watch the video later. Awesome. All right. Well, I'm glad you found the channel. If you haven't already, toss a subscription over there on the YouTube side so that you don't miss updates. But yeah, we have literally years worth of content that you can go through. So yeah, welcome aboard, right? Okay, so really the only thing that the configuration should really need is the resource name, right? Because all we're doing otherwise is we're basically just copying all of all of these sizes and stuff out of the configuration, right? And allocating memory and stuff. Like all of this doesn't belong here. And as a result, we could actually get rid of all of this stuff out of the configuration, make the configuration super light, and then load all of this stuff when we actually load that resource. I think that's the way we're going to do it, folks. But first, ads. So for those of you who are new to the stream and can still hear me, or those of you over on the YouTube side, we pause the stream whenever ads come up, at least on the Twitch side, right? YouTube ads work a little bit differently, but over on the Twitch side, we're given ads once every 30 minutes for up to 90 seconds. And so I like to pause the stream whenever those come up, so that's nobody misses anything. And also, it gives a chance for people to hydrate. So if you haven't already, go grab some water and hydrate, right? It's good for you. And I keep a timer up there so that you guys know exactly how long you have left. All right, almost done with ads. Got about 20 seconds left. And then we'll jump back into it. All right, and ads are dead. So for those of you who couldn't hear me during the ad break, I do like to pause the stream whenever ads come up on the Twitch side. That's once every 30 minutes for 90 seconds so that nobody misses anything. And I put a timer in the screen so that you guys know exactly when we are going to be coming back. So that way if you need to grab any water to hydrate, which you should be doing, you could do so. All right, so let's actually take a look at our terrain config first. And we actually have all kinds of things that don't really belong in here, right? And so I believe most of this stuff is actually already living on, yeah, see, like our material and our material names, like all these properties already exist on the terrain, right? So we can actually, I think, just nuke most of this stuff. So I guess we can leave name for right now, but like chunk size, tile count, tile scale, vertex data length, the vertex datas, the material count, the material names, like all of that stuff can go bye-bye. And all we really need is resource name, all right, to load the resource. That's all we need. So the terrain itself can also take resource name. Oops. Right? And we could just do that here. Resource name is equal to config resource name. And then take all of this stuff. All of this stuff. Cut it from there. Come down to initialize. Put it right here. Right, we'll come back to that in a second. So I think this is all we need to do in create, right? We're just going to take a copy of the name and a copy of the resource name. When we initialize, that's when we're actually going to do the resource loading. So what we'll do is we will go over to this section, we have this terrain resource. And we're going to do essentially, we're going to take that whole section, put it here. Right. So there's our parsed config. We'll probably need to change this up a little bit, right? Because our terrain loader is actually loading the terrain config. Well, let me think about this for a second. How are we doing this with... So our mesh is actually Javafied in terms of loading, which I don't believe our meshes are. The textures for them are, but I don't think the meshes themselves are. I could be wrong about that. Yeah, so see, when we go to do our mesh create, we are just basically zeroing out the memory and setting the name, and that's basically it, right? And then when we go to initialize... Oh, interesting. So when we initialize, all we are doing is checking whether we have a resource name or geometry configs and setting those things appropriately. The load, I'm guessing, is actually what... Oh, that's what we did. We tied it all into one thing. So our mesh load resource... This is where it's Javafied. Okay. So... Mesh load job starts. It's been a while since I've written this code, so I have to refresh my memory, right? So we load the resource at this point. Into a mesh resource. Load params. It's just that, okay. And then we return the result. So on the job success, we then have, oh, okay, so our mesh actually gives us an array of geometry configs, and that's it, I guess. So our GPU, our terrain handles this a little bit differently because it's got more sort of global data. So it's not just going to be geometry configs, it's going to be all kinds of stuff. But this all ultimately is part of the load process, not even the initialize process. So that actually is kind of telling. So even here, this stuff isn't really warranted. This all actually belongs in the load, which I guess sort of makes sense. It's just going to make it a lot going on in load, but I think that's okay, right? Because load is really what should be accessing the assets on disk. So we're going to refactor this a little bit more than I thought, but that's okay. It's not a huge deal. So let's take all of this, all the way down to here, and put it in terrain load, right? And we're going to put it right before we actually load all of the chunks, all of our terrain chunks, right? So we're going to do this in steps. We're going to do, first, we're going to load the terrain resource, which is more like a terrain kind of configuration type of thing, right? So we have resource system load. Is that not... we didn't have that included. Okay. And so this is going to be terrain Actually, it's just T resource name. Let's see. So we're going to load that into terrain resource, right? If this fails to load, we will return false. And then we have terrain config, parse config is basically cold casting the terrain resource data. So our terrain config only contains our resource name now. It doesn't contain all this other stuff that's going to be parsed from the terrain resource. So we actually need a separate data structure for that. That's not a config technically. It's going to be a, I guess like a terrain resource, I guess we could call it. So I guess let's peek definition on this. And actually what I want to do is I want to undo these changes real quick because I want to make a copy of this. Right, and then redo everything. And then I guess let's call this, let's go here. LOD, here we go. So let's call this typedef struct terrain resource. All right. Oh, did I copy the actual top level struct as well? Apparently I did. Okay. So now we can use this terrain resource as our structure and keep our config light, right? So what this will be is, let's rename this. So we don't have a collision there. And then this is going to be terrain resource parse config. Right, so we'll cold cast that. Why is it doing that funky formatting there? That's kind of weird. All right, and then we have parse config. So this is actually going to be, let's rename this to typed resource. And then this is going to be typed resource. That's going to be typed resource. Xform actually can go away. We don't have that here. All right, so we have typed resource. Right, so we have all of those. Out terrain. It's just going to be T. Right, all the way down. There's going to be a lot of these apparently. All right. All right, so let's just do all of these at once, I guess. And I'm doing them one by one because I don't want to find and replace in the whole file, because there are places that have out terrain, like here, that is legit. Okay. Let's see. let me catch up on chat really quickly. Cat Develop, hello. Good to see you. Apotham, welcome. Good to see you as well. Oh, it's a stream streak. Nice. 10 streams. That's awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you, Ruche, for the hydrate. Max, over on the YouTube side, hello. How are you doing tonight? Hope well. All right. So copy all of our stuff over. Now all of these configs are now going to be typed resource. So config, right? We could just do that. Right, vertex datas, materials. Okay. So the only thing that should use the config is terrain create. The only thing it extracts from that now is the resource name. The initialize doesn't really do much of anything, to be honest. And I think that's okay because it can't really do anything until we've accessed the file, which should never be done until we actually load. So in the load now, we do access the terrain resource, and then we loop through, allocate all of our memory for all of our chunks, our vertex data, all that stuff, and then before we actually start generating the geometry, because I think we're actually done with our typed resource, right? So this is the last instance of that. So right here, we can unload the terrain typed resource. Chag, thank you for the follow. Appreciate that. Or Chaga. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Probably Chaga, right? Appreciate the follow there. All right. So we unload the typed resource. Oh wait, no, it's not the typed resource we want. It's the terrain resource. That guy. Right? So we unload that. And then we go ahead and generate the geometry, the identifier. And then we go ahead and we load up all the chunk data, increment the generation, and we're good. Okay, so we have that. One more thing that we need to do before we're done with this terrain moving stuff around is we need the terrain state, right? So I'm just going to do peak definition on this guy, and right above terrain. Let's see. I guess this one's a little bit tricky because we have multiple terrain chunks which could be loaded and unloaded, and eventually we're going to have these streamed, right? In and out. But I guess we could consider the terrain loaded as a whole, and then maybe we can just check terrain chunks to see if they're loaded and unloaded. I'm not 100% sure how I want to handle that yet, but I think for right now, let's keep it simple. We'll say type def. If I can spell it right. So type def enumeration, and we're going to call this terrain state. Right? And we're going to have terrain state, and I'm going to put in just a few of these. So the first one is going to be undefined. The next one is going to be created. Initialized. Loading. Loaded. Right? And then in terrain itself, we will have... Oops, right. Let's put it here. Oops. Terrain state. State. Right, so we just need to fill that out for the various pieces of this. So if this fails, we'll say out terrain state equals terrain state undefined, right? And then otherwise, if we get here, we'll say out terrain state equals terrain state created. When we destroy, and we're done with that. Actually, when we start to destroy, we should probably do that at the very top. We'll do T state is undefined. We should probably also do that in the unload. So unload. Right? And actually, I'll do that after this check to make sure it exists. Right? So in the initialize, we're just going to paste this again and say terrain state initialized, right? So we have that one, and then the load here. After we verify it exists, we're going to say loading at the top. And then we'll go to the bottom of this. Right before we return, we will say loaded. Right? And that way, our state should always be valid. Cotton paper, forsen. What does that mean? I'm not sure what that means. Will you eventually handle terrain holes? Yes, it is actually on our to-do list, i.e. caves, etc. Yeah, so I believe we have right there. Yeah, it's actually on our to-do list. Yep. As well as we actually do want to support tessellation for like close-up LODs. And then eventually collision as well, once we have a physics system in place. So yeah. And I've actually thought a little bit about, in fact, I'm going to add it, right? Because I've thought about this as well. And this might add a little bit of pogginess out there. Voxel-based. Voxel-based terrains are eventually going to be a thing. And we are also going to have smooth voxels. So that's, I don't know when that's going to make it in, but it's something I definitely want to add. Okay. So we have all the state information. We've fixed our initialized load. Terrain should pretty much be good to go. Nice, I'm interested to see how you handle that. Always an interesting problem to solve. Yeah, and more than likely we're going to try a few different things to see what works best. Singy, hello, over there on the YouTube side. How are you doing? Good to see you. All right, so instead of doing all of this rubbish, we have our new terrain. Instead of our parsed config, which we no longer have, let's actually do this above here. Let's do terrain config. Right, and equal this. OG Neutrino, thank you for the follow. Appreciate that. Welcome. So tear config. So the resource name is going to be the typed attachment resource name, right? So that's really the only thing we need in here. And then here we will pass terrain config. Oh, you know what? I don't think I changed. No, that should have been, oh, it wants a pointer to it. Okay, fine. Address of. Okay, so we're not copying anything there, so that comment is useless. All right, so if we fail to load, we're going to return. We don't need to worry about that anymore. And then instead of pushing to the terrains D array, we are going to handle that. Actually, let me bring that back because I do actually need that. But we are going to handle it pretty much the same way as this guy up here, right? So, in fact, I'm actually just going to copy this whole section here because it's like mostly the same. And like I said, we're probably going to wind up extracting this to a function of its own. All right, so you know what? Let me rename this to be consistent. New terrain config, right? And then that way, this can be new terrain config. So we destroy that config, right? And then we have terrain initialize, new terrain, fail to initialize terrain. All right, find a free terrain slot and take it. So this is going to be terrains. This will be terrain state undefined. Terrains. Terrains. New terrain. All right. So we've just basically converted all of this stuff to be terrains here. And then all we need to do is set up the scene attachment, right? So we'll move that up, make sure I'm not working behind the camera again. So we go ahead and acquire a new attachment. That's all the same steps and resources before. I think the only thing we need to change is actually the type, right? The attachment type. So this is going to be attachment type terrain. And then that actually can go away because we've done that up here. So that is terrains in initialize. Let's see. So scene initialize. I believe we actually removed terrains out here already. We have. Okay, cool. One more step towards refactor completion. Let's see. I love how Twitch decides that I want to watch the stream in 360p. So smart. Most definitely what I wanted. You know, it did that to me earlier today too. It was really weird. I had to actually manually change it. Which makes absolutely no sense because I'm actually on fiber internet now. So, like, bandwidth is not an issue. LSP is taking up all my RAM and I keep getting encoding errors. Oof. How much RAM do you have? But that's probably for that 25K file, right, that you have. Had an encoding error after sending that to 32 gigs. Pfft, that should be plenty. What the heck is going on with your LSP? You might need to update that if you haven't already. All right. So next thing we're going to work on, I think the next thing we need to take out of here, since we already have all of our things that actually require resources to be loaded. Oh, it's the Jai LSP. Right. Okay. I was still thinking the C LSP, but yeah, Jai LSP is probably, yeah. You should probably open an issue for that. Yeah, definitely. If it's like hammering 32 gigs worth of memory, yeah, that's an issue. And we have ads. So, for those of you who are on the YouTube side or can still hear me on Twitch, we like to pause the stream for ads. We are served those on the Twitch side once every 30 minutes for 90 seconds or up to 90 seconds. And so when we do that, we just like to pause the stream so that nobody misses anything. We put a timer up on the screen so that you guys know exactly when we're coming back. So if you need to grab some hydration, go ahead and do that. All right, almost done. Got about 20 seconds left. Almost done with ads. I see I've got a question there on the YouTube side. I'll get that in just a second. All right, cool. Ads are dead. So, for those of you who did not hear me, because you obviously had ads on the Twitch side, I like to pause the stream whenever there are ads. We get up to 90 seconds of ads every 30 minutes on Twitch. So, what I do is I pause the stream because that sucks if you're like trying to follow along with a programming stream, right? And so I like to pause that so that nobody misses any content, and I put a timer on the screen so that you guys know exactly when we're coming back. And if you want, you can also take that opportunity to hydrate, right? So it's always a good thing. All right, so over on the YouTube side, Dawn Developers was asking, well, first off, they said, hi, what good work you do. What IDE do you use? It looks so cool. So I'm using NeoVim right here, right? So I actually have my configuration for NeoVim available on the web. So I'll drop a link there for that in chat so that you can take a look into that if you're interested in that. I'll drop it on both sides. But yes, let's see. Oh, Dev W Sam, are you also the are you the same person that was over on the YouTube side? Yeah, okay. So welcome over on the Twitch side if it is you. But yeah, I use NeoVim. Yep. So yeah, there's my configuration for that. Okay. So we have, I think we have this done. Do we have any errors in the train file? It doesn't look like it. Okay. So I guess the next thing that we need to move over is the directional light, which doesn't actually need any sort of resources, but does have this sort of debug data thing that can be loaded, which in our case is just a single line that indicates to us what the direction and color of the light is. So debug shapes are one of those things that I was thinking of actually moving to like a different, potentially a different scene. I don't know. Maybe I'll hold off on doing that and just put a to-do in there. Just put a pin in it for now. But I'm thinking it might be useful to have those all separated out into a scene. That way we can very quickly just say, you know what, show debug data or don't show debug data. And we could just quickly turn that on or off. and then maybe not even include that in release builds, right? So like maybe we have a completely separate type of scene that's specifically for debug data that we just input everything into. And maybe that scene could be coupled to another scene that, it inherits its transforms from and stuff like that. We'll have to think about that a little bit. Inverted Gold, thank you for the follow. I appreciate that. Welcome. So I guess for right now, I'll just kind of do it as is. So it looks like we do create the debug line for this guy. So we will have to change that up a bit. Dev W Sam, I appreciate the follow. Thank you for that. Nachu EXE, greetings from Argentina. Awesome. Welcome. We've got some folks in here from Brazil too. I know. Well, actually, I don't know if they're here tonight. I haven't seen the two that I'm thinking of. But yes, welcome, and that's really cool that you're all the way from there. So, welcome to the stream. Hope you're doing well tonight. Okay. So, let's, I guess. So before, if no name is assigned, assume no directional light. So that's rubbish. We don't do that anymore. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to grab this whole thing. And we're going to go back up to our node initialize. And we're going to take a look at our case for directional light. So skybox, here we go. And we're going to do this. And we're going to scope around it just like we have for the other guys. Right? And then we don't have to actually make this assumption anymore because we won't even have this node if there's no directional light, right? So there's that. Now, before we had this sort of assumption that we made when I first created scenes that there would only ever be one directional light. And the reason that I am going to get away from that is because we might have multiple directional lights, but maybe there's one active and one inactive, right? So like maybe we should support multiple directional lights, even though maybe we don't necessarily use all of them, right? Okay, so I think what we need to do is essentially we need to take all these properties and push into the directional light array using the same attachment logic as we do above. So let's get the typed attachment first. So we have directional lights. All right. After we have that, let's see. We have this config, and then the create, and then the destruction of the config, and then the initialize, right? So I think what we actually need to do here I don't think there is there's no directional light create, right? So this works a little bit differently because we're not dealing with loading a resource here. Like there's not really a bunch of methods that surround a directional light, right? So really the only thing that we have here is new dir light is what we'll call it, right? And we'll just zero that out. And essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to let's see, how do we want to do this? I guess new dir light, right? So we'll do change to words, new underscore, oops. Right, so we should just be able to do that. All right. So we don't need this dynamic allocation anymore. These are no longer pointers. Okay, so we have scene config directional light name. So this is going to be, the name is going to come from typed attachment. Let's see. Oh, you know what? We don't actually have the name here. All right, let me do this for now, because we might wind up adding those back. And I'm going to comment this out and then say to do name question mark. Okay. So instead of scene config directional light config color, let's do, I think we can safely do a find and replace on this. So we'll do scene config directional light config. And we're going to take the dot too. And then we're going to do typed attachment arrow operator color. Six substitutions on 6 lines. We have 6 lines. We have 6 lines here. No, we have 5 lines there. So we're going to do the 6th one. I guess we'll find it. All right. So new directional line. This just needs to be a dot operator. Debug data. And then this needs to be new dir light debug data. All right, so we get the debug data all set up. We set up the points. We create those. All right, so we have all of that. The next thing is going to be we need to essentially do this logic. We don't have really an initialization that we need to do. Although, actually, if not debug line 3D, we do have an initialize for the debug line though. So we'll take the address of debug line. So k error failed to create debug line for directional light. Right, and then otherwise, we'll do the rest of this. So this is not skybox count. Whoops. This is not skybox count. This is directional light count. It's kind of long, but okay. This is going to be dir lights. How do we don't have a directional light state, right? Because it's not really something we load. So how are we going to detect which one of these slots are actually free versus occupied, right? Because we don't have a state. All we have is name data and debug data, which if we turn debug data off could be null, even if there is something there. So like what in data can we look at? Nothing really. So what do we need to do to handle that? That's an interesting conundrum. Let's see. Oh, you're hopping out, Villager? Okay. Have a good one. Let's see. Could you not change the data for the directional lights, or is it preferable to have two different sets of data? So the issue is like this. Of course, it's not going to. This data structure here for directional light is actually the same thing. Actually, this one, rather. This directional light data here, this guy, is what we actually pass to the shader directly. So this is the same layout that the shader expects. So I don't really want to add data to this because we actually pass this whole struct straight to the shader. I guess the directional light itself could have like a generation on it or something. It's not really something that gets loaded, you know? Yeah, dealing with alignment and shader is a pain for shaders. Yeah, exactly. And that's already nicely aligned and stuff like that. So I can't mess with that data structure. At least not for this. So I guess the directional light itself, let's see, we have name data and debug data. I could do a generation, but like this is literally the only thing I would use that generation for. Well, I suppose if I update this data, I could also update the generation and know when to upload this to the shader versus we're not. And I'm not currently checking that. I'm just currently updating it always. So I suppose that would have its use, right? So maybe I could just do I guess I could use the U32 for it. So let's do brief. The generation of the light can be, let's see, incremented. Change can be used to tell when a shader upload is required, I guess. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to say generation equals invalid ID. And then we'll have to default all of our directional lights generations to invalid ID when we create them. I think that makes sense. So I guess when we do this, let's see. So we set our new directional light. We'll do data, or no, just generation equals 0, right? So that way when we set this down here, it already has a generation that will essentially fail this test, right? Otherwise, we push it. Right? I think that makes sense. And then this is an attachment. We do the resource handle. We just need to change the type to directional light. I suppose that makes sense. We're going to have to add, or we're going to have to modify, rather, our directional light logic for the scene. Like when we add and remove a directional light, which I don't even know that's there, we're going to have to modify that to handle this generation stuff as well. Otherwise, that's going to be a bug that we have to debug later. Okay, but otherwise, I think that is all we need to do for that, for directional light. So we should be good on there. So that means that the point light is the last one that we have to do, at least in terms of moving these things over. So we actually have that here. All right, so we'll just do the same basic process. So we'll scope this off. All right, and then we're going to do away with the loop. And then we'll come up here and grab this. So let's see. This is going to be, instead of directional light, this will be point light. So we have new lights. Let's actually, yeah, new light's fine. Let's see. Scene config point lights name. So this is going to be essentially our, here we go. Scene config. And then instead of, let's see, directional light config, this is going to be point lights sub I dot. We're going to change it to typed attachment. Scene config point lights. Did it not like that final dot? Oh, I have to probably escape these. There we go. Okay, so to do name, cross that one out for right now. So we take our properties from the typed attachment, add debug data and initialize it. So up here, yeah, that makes sense. This is more the whole section that we need. More or less. Who is Wentz? Thank you for the follow. Appreciate that. Welcome. How are you doing tonight? Let's see. Can debug data be anything? Yes, it can. For right now, we're using it for debug boxes and debug lines, but it technically can be anything. I think we even set it up as a void pointer, if I remember correctly, so that we could do that. Yep, it's a void pointer, so it could be anything. Yeah. Let's see. Do you know it chat is artifact 3? I have no idea what you're talking about, to be completely honest. Feeling under the weather? No, my allergies are actually seemingly driving me nuts tonight. So my sinuses seem to be a little bit stuffy for some reason. Not sure why that is. Hi, I found episode 174 is missing in your YouTube channel. So I was wondering if somebody's going to bring this up or if I was going to be able to sneakily fix it. So I screwed up the episode numbers. You'll notice tonight is also episode 178, even though last night was also 178. And that's because when I was changing the episode numbers a few streams back, I went from 173 to 175 instead of 174. So I just have to go and rename the videos. It's there. It's just currently called 175. So I'll fix that probably post-stream, right? So it'll be fixed on YouTube, on Twitch. It'll be wrong for the 60 days that it's here. But since all the archives happen on YouTube anyways, once I fix it there, that's really the only place that matters. But yeah, thank you for pointing that out to me. I did notice that. I just have to fix it. But yeah, it's not actually missing. It's actually there. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So we need to do this. But we don't need the debug line create. We do need the debug box 3D initialize. And that's going to be debug box. And then debug box, oops, 4 point light, right? So we have that. Looks like we also need to debug box xform. So that's still using our transform stuff. So we are actually eventually going to need to update that as well. I'm going to update that in a separate pass because I think I'm going to change the way that debug data works in general. So I might just leave that exactly as it is for right now. Okay, so if we are successful, then we need to have point light count. And this needs to be point lights. Point lights generation. Point lights do not currently have generation, so we're going to have to add that as well. We're going to also do a U32 generation at brief. The generation of the light updated, or incremented rather, incremented on every update can be used to detect when a shader upload is required. Okay. So we have that. We're not going to use it quite for that yet, but at least we have that in there, right? So this is going to be point lights and let's see, do we have, this is just new light. Okay. New light. Right. Otherwise we push point lights. Let's see, our new light is a point light. I'm just making sure. Okay, so we have all of that converted over to point lights. And the only thing I think we have to change here is just point light. Okay, we don't need this. Okay, so I think that is all the initialization stuff refactored. The only couple of things that we have here are sort of the stragglers, like our debug grid. This directional line stuff we have actually already handled. Same for the point light debug boxes. We've actually handled that in line up here when we do the node initialization. So that can go, and I'm going to say convert grid to use ads. So we have ads. We are taking a break on the stream, just so that nobody misses anything. So for those of you over on the YouTube side, on Twitch, we get the ads that come up once every 30 minutes for 90 seconds. So we like to just pause the stream so that nobody misses anything, right? We have a timer on the screen so that we know when we come back. So hydrate. Nice segue, solid 8. I like that. Thanks. I try to kind of look over every once in a while and see when ads are coming and try to think of a segue if I can come up with one. Doesn't always work, but every once in a while I can. So we got about 30 seconds left on ads. I wish my sinuses would stop like being clogged. It's annoying. All right. All right. So looks like ads are dead. Cool. So I'd like to just pause the stream whenever we have ads come up so that way nobody misses anything. There's a timer on the screen, so that you guys know exactly when we are coming back, so that you can, take a bio break or get some hydration, something like that, right? Okay. Allergies suck. Yes, they do. And I'm on 2 allergy medications that I have to take every day, and sometimes I have to require like a third, because I'm allergic to every animal in my house, unfortunately, which is, smart life decisions. Okay, so that's done. Scene load. I think we already straightened all this out, with the exception of our debug stuff, and our light system directional add. So when we load, and this is going to be an issue for point lights too, maybe? No, actually our point lights are good. So why are our... Oh, because we have an array of directional lights. So we should probably also say, if directional lights. Stage 3 Ghost, thank you for the follow. Appreciate that. Welcome. And then we'll do a U32 directional light count equals the array length, scene directional lights, and then we'll loop through those for U32 0 I is less than directional light count plus I. Right, and then we will add directional lights sub I. I think we need the address of that, right? Whoops. Yes. So we need the address of that. Bleat about it if it fails. So this is going to be directional lights sub I. Debug data. Again, directional lights sub I. Debug data. JH, thank you for the follow. Appreciate that. Welcome. Let's see. Yeah, so we need to do a debug 3D load. Debug line 3D load, rather. And if that fails, then we need, again, this is going to be the same thing. Yeah, directional lights, sub-I, debug data, and directional lights, whoops, sub-I, debug data. Okay. So we should be good on there. We should probably also do a safety check. So if scene point lights, just wrap this in that, because we weren't doing that before, we should have been. And then scene unload doesn't really do anything except actually flag the scene state as unloading, and then we actually could potentially do the scene actual unload. So the scene actual unload is what we need to look at. We can look at that last, though, I suppose. The scene update is probably what's most important. So let's see. Update directional light if changed. I'm going to have that as a to-do. Doing this every frame might be expensive if we have to reload the geometry all the time. Right. So we are setting... Wait a minute. Are we really setting this every frame? That seems kind of like overkill. This is where we should be using that generation, right? Although we don't have anything to sort of cache that, so... You know, how do we know when the generation's been updated, right? All we have is a count. How do we know when the last update was complete, right? So we actually need... We'll have to do a little bit more work to actually get that to work the way that we want, unfortunately. Let's see. How do I make the background black in NeoVim? That's going to be in your color scheme that you're using. I'm using the Adwaita theme, which is in that link that you actually just used for the NeoVim command. All of my stuff is there. I finally did get around to updating that article, so it is up to date with what I'm doing currently. Let me see. Give me 1 second. I need to, unfortunately, blow my nose. 1 second. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. Allergies are kicking my butt tonight. All right, so what we are doing here, and it looks like we're doing this. Looks like we're doing this every frame, which is not great. I mean, technically, we're offloading the data to the beginning of the frame, like the data upload to the shader. I know we fixed that, but let's actually change this to say only update if changed. And we'll also say here the same thing. To do only update point light if changed. Because that's something, I mean, it's debug data, so I guess who cares, right? We can actually turn that stuff off eventually, but we should still probably just be cognizant of that. So I feel like we should probably still try to be safe here and say if scene directional lights exists, right, before we do any of this stuff, because we might not actually have a directional light. And then we can say, whoops. And then we can say U32 directional light counts equals darray length scene directional lights. And then for U32I equals 0, I is less than directional light counts plus I. And we'll go through all of these things, right? And then we can say, actually this, what we want actually is scene dirlights sub I generation is not equal to valid ID, and scene dirlights sub I dot debug data exists, right? So that's the only time we need to do anything here. Then we grab a convenience pointer to that. We check the geometry generation, and then we do a color set on that. So that should cover our bases on that. Point light debug boxes, that should be the same thing, right? So we'll just add a safety check to say if scene point lights, right? Because if we don't have any point lights, then we don't need to do any of that logic, right? So we might as well be a little bit safe there. Okay, so check meshes to see if they have any debug data. If not, add it here and init load it. Doing this here because mesh loading is multi-threaded and may not yet be available even though the object is present in the scene. Right, I'm glad I wrote that comment because I would not have remembered that. Okay. I'm thinking, though, that this logic actually is probably good like it is. I don't think we need to change much of that other than, ooh. So here's a problem. This might actually force us to update the debug boxes to use our new X-forms instead. Because now we have this transform parent set, which is our transform is sort of our deprecated version of that, right? But now this is saying we need to use the meshes transform, which no longer exists, right? The node has the transform. So we need to use that as the parent for this guy, which is not correct. So that is... I think that's going to kind of force us to make the update to our debug box in line. Okay. Yeah, I don't see a way around it. Because now we've got two different systems, right? And I'm not going to hook those together because one of them is going away. Cat develop. Hello. What's up? Not much. How about you? We're just kind of working our way through our scene hierarchy refactor. Hope all is well on your end. Okay. So, oh God, do I want to tackle this now? Let's put a pin in it. All right, this is technically going to break the transforms for the debug model data, right? To do need to update debug box lines to use xforms instead of transforms. Oops. There we go. Right. This is broken until that is fixed. Right, so I'm okay at the current moment if that's broken, but before we can actually merge this in to our feature branch or our version branch, that's got to be fixed. Okay. Scene render, frame prepare. Okay, so this is going to be. This just needs to be updated rather to act like our point lights do. So we technically need if scene dir lights. Right, we need to surround this whole thing with that, and then U32 directional light counts equals darray length, and then scene dir lights, and for U32 I equals 0, I is less than directional light count plus I. All right, so now that we have that, then we'll say if directional lights, sub I, generation is not equal to invalid ID, and directional lights sub I dot debug data, then we will add the debug data. All right. So that's all we need to do there. Point lights should probably also do if scene point lights for safety, right? Check meshes, right? So if scene meshes, okay. So that should be good to go. Let's see. Scene update LOD from view position. Okay, so here is an interesting thing that we're going to have to do. So this is the first time that we're going to actually have to go through our terrains and actually get our model matrix from our hierarchy using the nodes and basically do like a reverse lookup to get all that information. So we have the terrain. We want the scene, let's see, terrain attachments. Let me think about this for a second. So this is a scene attachment I. So scene attachment, pointer attachment equals the address of this guy. And the attachment has the resource handle. And it also has the hierarchy node handle. Oh, do we have a way to actually look that up, though? Because technically we need to get the attachment from the terrain index, which might not always be a one-to-one thing. So we have mesh attachment indices. Oh, right. That's our lookup source. Okay. So what we actually want is scene terrain attachment indices sub I. Right, so that should give us the right attachment. Let me think. Yeah, so that's... Okay. Terrain attachment in. Okay, so that should be... Perform a lookup into the attachments array. Thank you for the follow, by the way. Appreciate that. To get the hierarchy node. All right, so we have the attachment. The attachment hierarchy node handle. We can do hierarchy graph node let's see. I'm trying to remember how I work this out. So the handle index was it scene hierarchy node handles, and then we need sub attachment hierarchy node handle. I think that's right. Oh, right. I need the handle index. Right, so the node handles... I think I want the xform handle, actually. Yes. Okay. So k handle, xform handle. So we look up the xform handle. Then we say xform system or xform world get xform handle. And that will return to us a mat4 model. Okay. So I probably need to come up with a way to simplify this, right? Like we do have a way of this is a bit like a database lookup almost, right? So you can think of this almost as like a query into a database and sort of merging different tables, as it were. So there's probably going to be a better way of doing this, I feel like. Or at least a way to simplify it, right? To do simplify the lookup process. If I can type. All right. But we do have the model, right? So that is, I think, basically the way we're going to have to follow for essentially anything else. Okay. Scene raycast. Yeah, I'm not surprised that that also needs a little bit of attention. So I think the rest of this is pretty much going to be updating all these calls to do lookups into our hierarchy node or our hierarchy graph to get our transform data. I suppose yeah, we really should probably simplify this process some. But I'm going to go ahead and put it in line right now because before I change that around too much, I want to make sure it works, right? So I might just like slam a to-do in everywhere we do this so that it's easily traced. So let's see. The model here is for our meshes. Right, so we're going to do a lookup into mesh attachments, mesh attachment indices. And then we'll look up the XForm handle, get the model that way, which eliminates the need for that. All right. Okay, so we've got that. Okay, so our directional light add is going to have to change because we just had a pointer to a single light before, and now we actually have an array of these things. Which means we're also going to have to worry about handle generation and things like that as well. Do I want to handle that or come back to it? I think we're going to come back to this one. All right, we're going to come back to this one. I don't think it's going to be a crazy amount of work. In fact, it's probably going to look a lot like what we are doing exactly here for these point lights. Scene mesh add. Yeah, so this is actually going to be wrong too because we have to generate handles, nodes, etc. And actually, that just makes me think. So this is actually making me think we might, when we add a mesh to the scene, we can't really just add this without like some sort of hierarchy information either. And actually, technically, all of this applies to all the same thing, right? Like point lights, directional lights, like all of those things are actually going to need nodes now. Because the scene uses nodes for hierarchy, right? That's how we have parenting. So you're going to have to think about that some. Let's see. I think we're hitting the point where we're probably going to have to do a fair bit of refactoring in terms of these functions. And I'm wondering if it's even worth holding on to these or whether we should just maybe configure a node with its attachments and add the node instead of handling it this way. This needs to be added via a node with attachments. And that's technically going to be true for this as well. And this. that's not really a huge issue. Okay, so like all of these add and remove and all of these other things are actually all going to have to be refactored as well. So, yeah. So to give some context as to why we're doing this, just for those of you who are kind of just tuning in now and just found this, so why are we doing all this refactoring? Because we currently have a scene file that looks like this, right? So it's got some header information up here, and then we have things like a skybox, right? And then we have a directional light, and then we have meshes, right? But this is all a very flat hierarchy, and we actually did have the kind of hacked-in ability, at least for meshes, where we could say, like, we have this Sponza here, we have the Falcon here, we have a tree here, where technically we could say parent name equals Sponza, right? And then we would do some hackery to basically say, okay, well, the parent of this transform is this guy up here, right? And we don't want to do that anymore. We need a file format that is more expressive, because we need to be able to manipulate objects in the scene and be able to save that scene to disk, right? So this format isn't really going to cut it for us, right? This was good for prototyping and being able to add things in and be able to load stuff up and test things. But it's not really as expressive as we need it. So we're basically putting in the work that's going to be needed to revamp this file format so that we can read and write to it. Okay, let's see. X4. Hello, how are you doing? First time chat, welcome. Redeemed a stretch. Okay, I'll take that. We'll post the source on GitHub. It's already there. Yeah, so actually, I will drop a link in chat real quick to kohiengine.com. And what this is sort of the central hub for this whole project, right? So it's got a YouTube link and Twitch link on here. It's got information about the project. It's got a link to the GitHub, things like Patreon, Discord, all that kind of stuff, right? So if we go to GitHub, it's here, right? This engine is 100% free and open source. It's Apache 2.0 licensed, which means you can use it however you want, independently, commercially, personally, whatever. All that you have to do is say that you used it, right? And so with that, it is 100% open source and free. It will never have any sort of royalty fees or charges or licensing fees of any kind. It'll always be 100% free. Also, on my YouTube channel, I don't paywall anything. I don't have like a course that I'm trying to punt or anything like that. All of the knowledge here in the live stream, as well as on my YouTube channel, all those archives and all that stuff is 100% free. So all the Patreon memberships, the YouTube memberships, and all that stuff, those are optional ways to support me, but all the content is always going to be free. I'm not going to paywall any of it, right? And I do that because I view education as something that should be free, and I try to provide that, right? So if you want to support my work through one of those channels, I really appreciate it, but it's not required, right? It doesn't buy you anything. It's just a way of supporting my work if you want to go that route, right? So all of this is here, free and open source, right? So we've got, all kinds of stuff on here. So yeah, I hope that answers that question. Vulkan question: how the Vulkan render passes and especially the layout changes related to them work, because you have initial state and final state, but then When does it reset? It's confusing. Maybe the dynamic rendering extension would make all this stuff more clear, more explicit. Render passes and frame buffers are a bit black boxy. So yes and no, and that's kind of a long-winded question, right? That I don't know if I can answer all of that in like a minute or two. But a render pass essentially dictates what frame buffers you're using, what attachments you're using. So like, you know, your color buffer, your depth buffer, if you're using that, what the formats of those things are, image layouts, things of that nature, right? So render passes and frame buffers, they aren't really black boxy. Not really. They're just, you can think of them as more like configuration options, right? And then in terms of like render passes, when you're talking about layout changes, are you talking about like the image layout changes that happen? Because if you are, I mean, I guess you could consider that a little bit black boxy, right? But like, generally speaking, on your first render pass that you have, you're going to be clearing it. So like the image format incoming doesn't matter, right? But then the image outgoing might need to be in a format that is specifically optimal for the next type of operation that you're going to do, whether that's reading the image in a shader or something along those lines, right? Render passes control describe how one pass of a render is going to be coordinated within itself and among other render passes. Yeah, so it's like defining what your attachments look like, what your frame buffers look like on the way in and on the way out, basically. And then you just line those up one after another, essentially. More or less. That's a really like high level 30-second dirty explanation of it, right? But we've definitely covered it in detail on this series before. Dom Effects. Hey man, came over from the YouTube videos. Appreciate the content. Currently in the process of learning Vulkan myself and came across your videos. Awesome. Well, welcome. Glad to have you here. And I'm glad that you find them useful. Swap chain stuff especially. I've been programming my old engine. Now it renders 2 images, but then moans about the depth stencil image having the wrong layout. So, I mean, the swap chain itself is relatively simple in concept, right? So all the swap chain is basically what is responsible for displaying one of your images to the screen and telling you what images are available and what images aren't available, right? What image is currently being displayed to the screen, and then what image is available for being written to, right? And that's generally your color attachments. If your depth stencil image has the wrong layout, then that's likely going to be not really a swap chain issue. It's going to be a render pass issue, right? It takes a while to wrap your head around, for sure, but once you do get it sorted, it's not so bad. We actually have videos on the render pass and frame buffer and all that stuff when we set that up here. And we've actually touched it a couple of times, so throughout the series. But yeah, although the swap chain I haven't touched in... I don't think I've touched the swap chain really since I created it initially. So once you get it right, it's pretty much good to go. Let's see. How frequently are you generating your terrain chunk LOD meshes? Is it every frame? So right now, no. But eventually we want to be able to have the ability to stream those in and out. So based on where you are within the terrain, we'll basically be able to query an occ tree, or I might be able to use a quad tree for it, and just say what terrain chunks should be loaded for the area that we're in versus what's visible and whatnot. And anything that's not going to be visible or not within a certain range, unload them, right? So eventually we want to be able to do that, so it could vary by frame. Um, okay. So, with all that said, I think this is probably where I'm going to end it tonight because I am tired. My allergies are kicking my butt, apparently. And I think we have. I think we've made some pretty good progress tonight, actually. Um, so, this is all the stuff that we've done so far, which is not bad. Um, so I'm going to push this up. And we'll do work in progress, scene, node, attachment. Actually, it's pretty much the same thing as before. All right, so we'll just get that pushed up to the GitHub repo on the Xform scene branch. And that way we can continue next time. So, with that said, let me see who we can raid. Let me actually look on. Let me see something real quick. Just looking through channels to raid. I think I know who I'm going to raid, but give me 1 second here. All right. Yeah. I think for tonight, namely because I'm tired, I think I'm going to raid Ferret Software tonight. So, Ferret Software is a ferret rescue organization that is basically set up to take ferrets that are in neglect and or abuse situations or near death and rehabilitate them and give them a permanent home. So the ones that are here are there for the rest of their life, and they're really well taken care of. And the ad revenue from this stream is used to care for them. It gives them the food, pays for the medical bills, all of that stuff, and it's all just from the ad revenue. So you guys simply leaving the channel open is enough to fund all of that, and it's really awesome. It's a great cause. I think it's fantastic, and I'd like to support it whenever I can. So that is what we're going to do tonight. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me tonight. And if you haven't already, definitely I would suggest subscribing on the YouTube side and or following on the Twitch side so that you guys can catch me the next time I stream. So thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it, and I'll see you guys next time.